We're waiting to see if we could get some presenters to talk about micro-credentialing, and we have. So we are going to be focusing today on micro-credentialing, what that is, how Kentucky and Arkansas have included that as part of their processes in those states. And so we already have our agendas for the next two meetings, so we are ahead of the game in terms of Wesley and I. So the first thing that we have on our meeting is to approve the agenda. So we need a motion to please approve the agenda for today.
This is Vivian Covington, so moved.
Thank you, Vivian. Do we have a second?
Ms. Alzahari, I'll second.
Thank you so much. Is there any discussion or corrections to the agenda? Hearing none, if you could unmute and all in favor, please say aye of approving the agenda.
Aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the agenda is approved. The second thing that we need to do is approve the minutes from our April 20th, 2021 meeting that Kim sent out for us. So could I please have a motion to approve the minutes from April 20th, 2021?
Motion to approve, Catherine Joyce.
Thank you, Catherine.
Second, Avira Lassane.
Thank you very much. Any discussion or corrections to the minutes? Therefore, let's have a vote. Again, if you could unmute and say aye if you approve the minutes from the April 20, 2021 meeting.
Aye.
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 Very good. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the minutes are approved. So those are the business items for our meeting. So we want to just remind everyone about the norms. So again, the subcommittee work is led by the interest and needs of North Carolina students and educators. So we're trying to look at all of this work through a student view. We're going to try to work toward consensus on our final proposal, noting that we may not all agree with every detail. We talked about in our first meeting, number 3, that we want I particularly talked about this, and I want everyone to feel like they can speak up, that everybody's opinion is valued. And number 4, that we want like everybody to talk, like everybody give their opinion. 5, if we don't understand what someone's saying or you do not understand what Wesley and I are saying, please ask for clarification, and that we all commit to full engagement. So we just wanted to come back to some norms for the meeting, and we've had great participation so far, so we don't really see we haven't seen any problems with our norms, but it's just always good at meetings to bring them back up. Does anyone have any comments or anything they would like to say about the norms?
Hi, this is Melissa Tooley from New America. Just one thought I think that might be helpful is that when people share opinions, if they could provide any evidence to sort of help others understand that opinion, I think that would be really helpful in helping everybody be on the same page.
That'd be great. Thank you. Kim, can we also make note of adding that to our norms?
Sure.
Unless anyone's opposed to that? Great. Thank you. Okay. We'll move on to the next. We just have some overview things here. We can move to slide 3, please. Or slide 4. Thanks. So the guiding principles for the subcommittee work has to do with, does your idea have an impact on students? And is it measurable in an authentic setting? So that's the 2 main guiding principles for the things that we should be deciding about licensure, and how it's going to impact the PK-12 classroom, and is it measurable in authentic settings? So I think this is a slide we'll probably keep for most of our meetings, and to think about, in the end, what is it going to do in the classroom? So any comments here? All right, and we can move to the next one. So the question that we're focusing on today around micro-credentialing is, what are the measures that satisfy advancement through the system tiers? So we're going to talk about a sub-piece of that because there's micro-credentialing and the committee at large and the co-chairs. As co-chairs, we talked about we needed to dive deep, a little bit deeper into that so everybody's on the same page with this vocabulary and on the same page of how this might work. So this is the question that we're focusing on through our discussion today. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Wesley to introduce our guests who are going to be with us through our whole meetings to be able to answer any questions that we have. So Wesley, please take it away.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone's had a positive day and hopefully a productive week. If you remember from our April 20th meeting, Dr. Tomlin presented on our current licensure system to bring everyone up to speed with how licensure currently works in North Carolina. We also looked over the licensure pathways that has been proposed by the Human Capital Roundtable, and we want to continue to build on the background knowledge of what's in the pathways, which one of those topics is micro-credentials. And I've been completely honest with Ann as we've worked through this that micro-credentials is not one of my expertise. And working in HR, that's not really a topic that I deal with much, so I thought it was important to make sure everyone on the subcommittee gets a better understanding of what micro-credentials are and how they can be used to meet the needs of the licensure pathways that's been presented to us, specifically in license number 2 and license number 3. If you've been looking at your chart and information we discussed, that is a component that can be considered for advancement in licensure. So we were hoping that we could have some folks from the field that are currently using micro-credentials and are involving that maybe in their licensing process of their states. So we have 4 presenters today, and we're going to start with Mr. Robert Brown and Miss Jennifer Carroll, and I'm going to read just an introduction of each of those before they get started so that you can have some background information on our presenters. Miss Jennifer Carroll is the Personalized Professional Learning Lead at the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. Jennifer provides professional learning support across 25 rural, high-need school districts and builds the capacity of districts and schools to implement systems of continuous improvement. Jennifer is the lead developer of micro-credentials for the KVEC, which is the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, and has supported the agency in developing over 30 micro-credentials focused on the needs that are offered free of charge to schools and districts. Jennifer has a Bachelor's of Science degree from the University of Louisville, a Master of Arts degree from Morehead State University, and a doctorate, which was also based on research around micro-credentials from the University of Cumberland. Jennifer was Kentucky's Social Studies Teacher of the Year in 2000 and was the president of the Kentucky Association of School Administrators in 2017. So we welcome Jennifer this afternoon. Also, we have Mr. Robert Brown. Mr. Brown has over 36 years of experience in Kentucky public education. He is in his 5th year serving with the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. He previously served 10 years with the Education Professional Standards Board, where he was appointed as the executive director prior to retiring from the agency in 2015. He led several state initiatives during that time, which included redesigning educator preparation programs for teachers and administrators, implementing the grant initiative Network for Transforming Educational Preparation, and redesigning and overseeing various programs such as the Kentucky Teacher Internship Program. He has served on a variety of state and national organizational task forces, including the Council of Chief State Officers, Certification and Licensure Collective, which developed the design, assessment, and implementation principles for educator micro-credentials. His last positions included teacher, principal, and assistant superintendent in Kentucky Public Schools. So we welcome Jennifer and Robert for our first presentation, They have also agreed to stay with us for both presentations, and that way we can make sure we have all of our questions answered or asked at the end that you may have from the field. So welcome, Jennifer and Robert.
Thank you very much. I believe I'm going to turn this over for Jennifer to get us started, and I believe Kim has a PowerPoint for us to go through.
Yeah, thank you all very much. We're excited to be here and talking with you guys. MicroCredentials, something that we really enjoy kind of sharing our learning processes around. So, and it was good to kind of hear your perspective that you're interested in learning a little bit more about what they are and how they fit within educator professional learning and licensure systems. So I think we can just share a few of our battle scars and help you understand where we're at with the work, and then maybe this could lead to some future collaborations. So if, Kim, if you'll just go ahead and click me over one. The Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative, just to give you a little background about us, we are the oldest educational cooperative in the state of Kentucky. We were established in 1969. We are a non-regulatory service agency, which means our members choose to be members of our cooperative. We have recently expanded to 25 districts, which is over 144 schools. Our geographic footprint is larger than the state of Connecticut. So I know you guys, being close neighbors, are familiar with the kind of the geography of Kentucky. We are the far southeastern part of the state, so right in the heart of the mountains too. We are the main provider of educational services for our districts. We provide special education services, we provide support with procurement of goods and services, and then of course we are the main providers of professional learning networks and other support to our school districts as well. So as a primary provider of professional learning for our rural high-need districts, we're pretty familiar with the obstacles and challenges related to high-quality professional learning, and especially around the idea of training teachers and retaining teachers. So in Kentucky, we're in our third biennium of zero state funds provided for professional learning for our districts. So budgeting is a huge challenge around professional learning. Geography is a barrier to our schools and districts as we think about professional learning, because we have districts that are over 4 hours of travel time away from some of the larger cities where conferences and professional learning sessions are held. That requires overnight stays, it requires substitutes, it requires time out of the classroom, so that is a challenge as well. But we also face a challenge around results. And that is why we started exploring the idea of micro-credentials, because of the fact that those will help us get to what we call the sweet spot of professional learning, where we can really look at and think about improved professional practice and advanced student outcomes. So I was really pleased to see the guiding principles that you all are focused on and that you adhere to in your work as you think about what is the impact of your work on students, and are they measurable? And that is exactly what we were looking for in terms of high-quality professional learning when we started investigating the idea of micro-credentials. So this quote that is there from Billboard around the fact that a lot of times professional learning sessions are designed for teachers as sit and get type workshops, and learning is measured by time. Robert and I have been in education for a long time. I'm in my 30th year. I've done a lot of professional learning sessions for teachers, and at the end of the day, they've sat in a seat for 6 hours, and I give them a certificate. All that certificate says is you did a really good job of sitting in a chair for 6 hours, because it is not measuring their learning. It's not measuring what is going back and taking place in the classroom. It's not measuring the impact on students. So I'm really trying to find a professional learning solution that would help us to get to that. And so Kim, if you'll just click to the next one. One of the things that we really started to think about is that our school districts needed support in creating systems of professional learning, and not just looking for the next bright, shiny thing, but how we really build their capacity and support to implement professional learning that does improve educator professional practice, and increase student outcomes. And along with that, there are different types of competency-based professional learning. So that it does get to that impact in the classroom. So those types of professional learning could include mentoring and coaching, where folks are paired up with each other, building on the strengths and the talents of those professionals in the classroom, modeling and feedback, networks. KVAC facilitates several different networks across our region for educators in different role groups and different content areas, and how to link those folks together to learn from each other. And micro-credentials are a key component of that. But as you will see, they're not promoting the idea that micro-credentials need to replace all types of professional learning. Micro-credentials are one component of a professional learning system. And that is the approach that we take here at KVAC. We're not at all trying to do away with all other forms of professional learning and implement micro-credentials. We're looking at how we can support schools and districts in creating professional learning systems that meet the needs of their educators and include micro-credentials as a component of that work. Okay, just switch to the next one for me. So we've struggled around a common definition of micro-credentials, and that is one of the best places to start. So it's good that you are thinking around that, because everyone has different visions and ideas about what micro-credentials are. Some folks use them interchangeably with the idea of badges, and they really are two different things. Micro-credentials are a form of clinical, personalized, and competency-based professional learning in which educators are providing proof and evidence of a specific competency. So I think some key words in that definition, if you were to kind of dissect it and think about it, is the idea about clinical. The idea that educators are learning and practicing new ideas and strategies and pedagogy within their classroom. Just like we ask our students in the medical field to learn and practice on the floors of a hospital or the floors of a doctor's office, they need to be engaged in the learning where the learning is happening. And so we think of micro-credentials the same way, that teachers are learning and practicing their craft within the context of their own classroom. So another thing to think about is that micro-credentials can also empower teachers or administrators, because it's not just teachers. But a lot of times we just use the term teachers because we're thinking about the professional learning aspect of it. But teachers can select the micro-credentials based on what they want or need to know. And sometimes those micro-credentials can even be things that they have already demonstrated a competency in. And they want that certification to show that they have that mastery. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. If I am already proficient in balanced assessment, I understand formative and summative assessment, I understand how to match methods of assessment to my learning targets, I've really mastered that work through past professional learning experiences, through my educator preparation program, whatever, then I can choose a micro-credential and complete the learning that goes along with that micro-credential and earn that certification to show that I have that mastery. Kim, if you'll click it for me again. So when we think about micro-credentials, we think about them being competency-based. That's really focused on a very discrete skill or competency that the educator is desiring to show mastery of or proficiency in. But they are personalized, but it might be based on the teacher's professional learning goals. It might be based on the professional learning goals of the school or district that they're in, or the program that they are in. What are those needs that I need, the professional learning needs that I need to demonstrate? But they are on demand. The educators are engaged in this learning as appropriate. So, maybe I am doing some of the research and the study at home, and then I'm coming into my classroom and implementing what I have learned. So it is not something that has seat time attached to it, or that you have to be online at a particular time, like an online course or a MOOC course. It is something that happens on demand. The learning is shareable. That is what is so unique about a micro-credential, is that these badges that educators earn is really a digital icon. And when you click on that digital icon, it shows you the competency that the educator has earned. You're able to see the micro-credential that the teacher has earned. And then I think it's also important that we understand that these micro-credentials are research-based, that the competency and the key methods that the educator engages in are based in scholarly research. So it's not just, oh, that looks like fun, or that looks like something I want to do. It is really based on what has an impact in the classroom. So some of the ones that, I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the ones that Cabot has developed, but I will tell you that one that we developed early on, based on need across our region, was a micro-credential around balanced assessment and assessment literacy. And that was because about 10 years ago in our state, and North Carolina is probably the same, we had some money. We had money floating around. We had a Gates grant in our state, and we had some funding from other sources, and there was a lot of regional professional development going on in our state. And one of those was really focused on transforming our assessment system. We had a lot of trainings by Rick Stiggins and Jan Chopin, and our educators were well versed in types of assessment and formative and summative assessment, but that was almost 11 years ago. And since then, we have had a huge turnover in staff. We have new teachers, we have folks that have moved into administrative positions, and we lost a lot of that learning. And instead of having to continuously offer 6-hour or 2-day or 3-day trainings on balanced assessment, we created a micro-credential that leads educators through this idea of assessment literacy and understanding types of assessment and when those types of assessment are appropriate. And that has really helped us to be able to continue to build the capacity of educators who are new to the profession. Maybe they didn't really get well grounded in it the first time when they had it 10 years ago. Folks who have come to the profession from alternative certifications. We have a lot of that in our state. So really thinking about what are those needs and how can we meet those needs. Kim, if you'll switch it for me. This slide, when we're talking to folks about micro-credentials, seems to really help people kind of understand the difference between what a micro-credential is and isn't. So all the things that we just talked about on the prior side, about them being competency-based and being on demand and being clinical. But on the flip side of that, it's good to understand that they are not, that they don't have seat time attached to them. So you're not going to see a micro-credential that asks you to participate in 6 hours of professional development. It is not at all about seat time. It is about learning. They're not about one size fits all. You might have, there may be 20 micro-credentials out there around assessment, and you really need to kind of take the consumer's report approach to those and really review them to find the one that is going to best meet your needs around assessment. They are not traditional online courses or classes. I know a lot of times you will see folks who say, if you participate in this MOOC course, then you will earn a badge. That is not a micro-credential. That is a badge. A micro-credential is it's going to have those design characteristics that we're going to talk about here. Micro-credentials are not available only at set times. They are things that teachers can access on their own. Their learning can happen in the doctor's office parking lot. That can occur at home on the couch. It can occur during planning time. They're building their background knowledge and their skill and expertise through the research and resources that are provided in the micro-credential, and then their demonstration of learning happens within their classroom. And they're not about simply receiving information. All right. So CALEC's work around micro-credentials, I think it's kind of important to know a little bit about where we are with that. We have hosted 4 international micro-credential summits where we have brought together interested stakeholders from really across the globe. It's not just been nationally, to explore. Some of our very first ones were really exploring on, so what is a micro-credential, what isn't it, and then these last ones have focused more on collaborations around micro-credentials and how we are working to build systems of professional learning that embed micro-credentials. We contributed as part of a collective to develop who's kind of funded and sponsored by CCSSO, and I know that you all are familiar with the Council for Chief State School Officers. We've developed a design, assessment, and implementation principles for educator micro-credentials, which kind of just lays this common understanding and groundwork for this is what educator micro-credentials should look like, should do in order to be high-quality professional learning. We have developed 29, and we have 12 more in the queue that will be available on the Digital Promise platform. And we are supporting our districts in the development of professional learning systems that incorporate micro-credentials. So really helping our districts to understand when it's appropriate to use micro-credentials and how micro-credentials can meet the needs of their teachers. We are also doing some kind of neat and interesting work in that we are bringing together teacher experts, practitioner experts, to show them how to develop micro-credentials for professional learning. That work has been interesting in the fact that we're able to tap into the content and pedagogy expertise of teachers in our area, really get them thinking about the design of professional learning, which we have seen translate into the design of instruction in their classrooms. Because these teachers who have engaged in this work with us are really interested in, so how do I provide competency-based learning opportunities for my kids? You know, this is the kind of learning that's relevant, that I can see an impact in my professional practice. I can see evidence of outcomes. How can I do this for my kids? And so that's really kind of shifted their pedagogy in their own classroom as well. And then we are working to provide coaching and support to other agencies in the development of professional learning systems that incorporate micro-credentials. So working with different stakeholders, and we're going to hear from one of those in just a little bit with the Arkansas Department of Education. I want to just kind of take a second and just tell you a little bit. I think a lot of times when we think about micro-credentials, people may be just a little bit leery about them because they wonder about rigor. And an individual micro-credential itself may not be rigorous enough to count toward licensure, graduate credit, whatever you're thinking about in terms of outcomes. But micro-credentials can be stacked together to get to that level of rigor. And the reason I'm showing you the screenshot of one of the micro-credentials that we have created, here at our cooperative, we have staff who are national trainers in the Ruby Paying Bridges Out of Poverty work. So we have tapped into this collective knowledge that we have within our agency, and we have created a stack of micro-credentials around teaching rural students of poverty, which is really what we do in our area. You know, we're talking about in our Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative area, we have 2 of the 10 poorest counties in the United States within our region. Most of our school districts through the community ed provision, our community eligibility provision, are 100% free and reduced lunch. So, you know, we have issues around poverty, and not all of our teachers are well versed in those pedagogical approaches to teaching rural students of poverty. So we have created a stack, with the first micro-credential being the one that you're looking at, called Understanding Types of Poverty. And what this micro-credential does is it really exposes teachers to those, to like research and knowledge around different types of poverty that kids experience. Not all poverty is generational. Not all poverty is situational, that happens because of a divorce or because of a natural disaster. But really understanding the types of poverty that our students experience and how that impacts their learning. And so in this micro-credential, what teachers do is they spend time collecting data and information about their students. So, you know, my students, are their parents employed? Are they on free and reduced lunch? If they're not living with their parents, who are they living with? Where are they living? What type of housing are they in? What type of transportation do they have? Do they even have transportation? What type of extracurricular activities do my students participate in? And they're collecting this data about their students, and then they're putting it into a data visualization. And, you know, teachers, for the most part, they do a lot of this data collection, but a lot of it happens kind of by happenstance. I might learn about Johnny's living with his grandparents right now, or I might learn that Susie's dad is in prison, or I might learn that right now Sarah is staying with her aunt and uncle because her grandma and grandpa are sick and are in the hospital. I don't learn about all that stuff just by happenstance, but to actually make a focused effort to collect this data about my students and then put it into a visualization that not only helps me understand where my students are and the things that my students are dealing with, but also I can share it with the other adults in the building that also come into contact with my kids, so that we can really start to understand where these students are and how these aspects of poverty are impacting their learning. So this is the first micro-credential in that stack. And then the stacks move on to developing relationships, to social and emotional trauma, to the learning structures that we use with students who are living in poverty, and then also how we provide interventions to these students so that it is not, so interventions are not punishment. So really understanding that one micro-credential, while it does improve professional learning and impact student outcomes, it may not be substantial enough to warrant an increase in certification or an increase in Kentucky we call it rank, and Robert's going to talk a little bit about that with you. It may not be enough, so those micro-credentials can be stacked together to get educators to that level of proficiency that we need. This may be a little bit too much information for right now, because I think this is something we can continue to have conversations about. But when I mentioned those national design, assessment, and implementation principles, one of the things that is inherent in that work is kind of deciding, so what's the structure of a micro-credential? What should our micro-credentials have in order to be of high quality? And that work helped us to kind of settle on the fact that a micro-credential should really clearly define that skill and competency that an educator is going to demonstrate. What is that skill or competency that an educator should know? And then how are they going to demonstrate it? What is going to be that key method? And then what are those pieces? I call them method components, and this is going to show my age. If you remember, a long time ago, when you had to read a book in your literature class, you found the cliff notes for it, which kind of gave you the highlights. Like, it wasn't enough that you could really ace the test, but it was enough that you could at least get through a class discussion. And I call the method components the cliff notes of the micro-credential, because it provides the highlights of this is what's critical about this learning, but an educator is going to have to go to the research and the resources in order to really truly build and demonstrate that competency. So the method components kind of gives you a framework or an outline. So if we're thinking about that assessment one that I was talking about, so this is what formative assessment is, this is what summative assessment is, this is when you use it, then gives you just enough information, but then you need to go dig deeper to understand what are types of formative assessments and types of summative assessments, and learn more about when they are appropriate. And then the true heart of a micro-credential is that an educator has to submit artifacts and evidence of their learning. They have to show the impact on their professional practice and show the impact on student outcomes. And that can happen in a lot of different formats depending on how appropriate it is for that micro-credential. So one micro-credential might require a teacher to video a lesson, and another micro-credential might require a teacher to submit a lesson plan and sample student work. Another micro-credential might ask them to submit I3. But it just depends on what best fits, what demonstration of learning best fits this micro-credential. And then another important piece of that is that the artifacts have scoring rubrics with them, because when micro-credentials are scored, they're scored by a person. It's not something that's done electronically by a computer or kind of standardized assessment. There is actually someone who is reviewing that micro-credential to make sure that those submission criteria are met. And then, if it's not, then that rubric is used to give that earner feedback to say, you mastered component 1. You did a really good job with that. But this, your video didn't contain these things, or wasn't really able to see from the lesson plan that you had demonstrated evidence of learning about formative assessment. But the rubric gives the language for the feedback. And we know that effective feedback, high on how these high yield strategies, we know that's an important component of learning. So that scoring rubric is there. The earner sees it while they're working on the submission. They know this is what I need to do in order to earn the micro-credential, but then the scorer or the assessor is able to use that scoring rubric to give the earner feedback as well. So these are, if you look through micro-credentials that you'll see on the digital promise page, or you look through the micro-credentials that you'll see on Billboard's page, they follow these guidelines, these criteria, because these are the ones that all the developers in micro-credentials kind of settle on as being that Creative Commons design of a micro-credential. All right. I'm not going to go, these next slides, I'm sure that this PowerPoint will be given to you as a resource, so I'm not going to put you to sleep with a lot of this data, but CAVEC actually has quantitative data based in our region about the impact and the effect of micro-credentials on 3 things: on educator professional practice, on student outcomes in the classroom, and around educator perception of how well micro-credentials as professional learning are aligned to what in Kentucky we consider to be our standards for professional learning, and those are the Learning Forward's standards for professional learning. So I don't know how we can click through these and not really, I don't want to bore people, but if you go to the next slide, I think. No, click on. I'll get you to one that kind of has, let's go to the one that says findings. One more. Yeah, so I will just kind of talk from this. We studied 100 educators, 50 who were engaged in micro-credentialing, and 50 who were engaged in what we call more traditional professional learning. So those were probably those district organized, we're going to have 3 or 4 presenters in, and people are going to rotate through those presenters. That's typically the kind of professional development that is being offered in our region. And a lot of times those presenters are whoever's free, because our schools and districts, they don't have professional learning budgets. So we looked at the 50 educators who were earning micro-credentials and the 50 who were engaged in traditional professional learning, and we first looked at this research question around, did those teachers who engaged in micro-credentialing have statistically significant higher professional practice ratings on the Kentucky Framework for Teaching, which is the Danielson Framework, which I think you all may use in North Carolina as well. So we looked at those. There wasn't a statistical significant difference there, and that's a whole other ball of wax. We can get into that conversation later if that's something you want to decide to tackle. But that was around the fact that in many cases, the evaluators of our teachers tend to rate them as accomplished or exemplary. So we were not able to find a statistically significant difference there. But on the flip side of that, they were all rated accomplished or exemplary. So we can wonder about what the impact is there. But for the next 2 questions, we'll look at research question 2. We look in our state. Our schools are required to administer an interim benchmark assessment, and our schools utilize the measures of academic progress, or the MAP assessment. But we were able to see that there was a significant difference in the MAP assessment scores between the teachers who engaged in micro-credentialing and the teachers who engaged in traditional professional learning. So those teachers who were engaging in professional learning had higher, we looked at their fall and we looked at their spring administrations of the MAP assessment, and we were able to see that there was a statistically significant higher score on that spring assessment than the fall. And then the last research question focused on those Learning Forward standards for professional learning, and we compared the Learning Forward agreed to let us utilize their standards assessment inventory, and we administered that standards assessment inventory to those 100 educators. And it asked them basically about the perception of their professional learning experience as aligned to those standards for professional learning. And our teachers found that our teachers felt that the MicroCredential professional learning experience more closely aligned to those standards for professional learning than that traditional professional experience that they were getting within their schools or districts. So we were happy to see some quantitative data in terms of okay, Vivian, that's a really good question. And so there was a slide a little bit earlier where we looked at the, and I didn't talk about it in depth, but we did talk about the characteristics of the teachers in the study, and they were very similar in terms of experience, classroom level. They were experienced in terms of, or they were kind of equal in terms of grade level, years of experience, and what other thing was I thinking about? But there was some commonalities around those, yes. They weren't exactly matched, the way Vivian spoke about it, but there was similarities across the groups. It was a struggle, honestly, at the point where we were at in our research, because this was done 2 years ago, to really have teachers who had been successful in a MicroCredential experience. So we were lucky that we had the 50 that we could follow in the study, and then of course we had lots of folks who were participating in traditional professional learning. So this gives us just a little bit of fuel to continue. We're going to continue to study how this is working, continue to study the impact that this work is having on professional learning in our area. But we do believe that MicroCredentials are a format for professional learning that help address adult learning styles, thinking about andragogy and how adult learners learn, but also aligns to, and we have to be cognizant of that, aligns to those national standards for professional learning. And then if you click forward just a couple more, you are really lucky in North Carolina, because you all have set the, started to set the pace for work around MicroCredentials with work that happened at the Friday Institute for Education and Innovation. And Robert will probably pick up here and talk about this too, but the work of the Friday Institute was what we started out with when we started thinking about MicroCredentials as a format for professional learning, because of that number one. The research that the Friday Institute did, they found that teachers who were successful with MicroCredentials wanted to earn more. And one of the battles that we have faced in our state, Robert and I were able to sit down and have a conversation with our former commissioner as we were talking about MicroCredentials as a format for professional learning and for licensure. And he told us kind of just frankly, he said, Jennifer and Robert, here's where I'm at with this. I can't get the legislature to fund professional learning because they're hearing from teachers about how bad their professional learning experiences are, how negative they are. And we were like, yeah, but we have MicroCredentials and they're not saying bad things about them. And he was like, I know, but this is a big shift in conversation to get the legislature to hear this. So he was helping us. We were getting to the point where we were going to have those conversations. And then we've had since then a shift in leadership, and so we're back still trying to have those conversations. And we have got our foot in the door. We have got our foot in the door and Robert's going to talk about that, with our Educational Professional Standards Board and MicroCredentials as a component of educator certification and rank change. But it's been hard. So with that, I know I've talked a lot. I know I haven't answered all of your questions about MicroCredentials, but I hope I've given you enough that we can at least make a connection and continue the conversation. So hopefully this will lead to some ongoing collaborations and discussions with you guys.
All right, thank you, Jennifer, for that presentation. Does anyone have any specific questions regarding Jennifer's presentation that you want to ask us, or will have commented in the chat? but feel free just to take a minute. If you have a specific question about her presentation, feel free to ask it, or also come back at the end with question and answers session from any of the presentations that we'll hear from today. So I'll pause just a moment to see if anyone has a specific question. If you're like me, you're probably trying to comprehend everything Jennifer has shared. There's some great information, and I'll be one to come back and probably look through this presentation again, and probably even listen to our meeting today to make sure I have all the questions I need to get answered. So we'll pause just for a minute.
Well, we're going to share our email addresses too at the end, and I will share some links in the chat while Robert was talking to some of our work. But we wanted to help you refer back around with us on this.
Yeah, I think you did a great job of introducing us to MicroCredentials to get that background information. All right, we'll turn our next presentation over to Mr. Robert Brown. So, Mr. Brown, the floor is yours this afternoon.
Okay, thank you so very much. Now, this one slide, I'm trying to figure out how to get my video on. I'm not familiar. There we go. Got it. Hi, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I just want to say hello, Melissa. I appreciate you attending. We did have finished up our last the fifth National MicroCredential Summit last week. We were bringing folks around the country together to have conversations around impact of MicroCredentials, around policy, which gets me to where, when I came to Quebec, I was brought on to start looking at the policy end of this and how we could incorporate MicroCredentials into some of the policy piece. And one of the reasons that Jennifer alluded to us being part of our work and hopefully done with our Educational Studies Board and our KDE is because of our thoughts and philosophies around microcredentialing. We don't see microcredentialing as the silver bullet that fixes everything. However, we see it as a strong component of a system that helps to enhance education for educators, ultimately leading to the success of our students. So we created this transformational framework diagram a few years ago to kind of give thoughts around how we move forward with microcredentialing. In most of our summits, we've had questions from some of our higher ed folks who say, you're trying to replace higher ed. Absolutely not. We're trying to have more partnerships with higher ed, and part of that work with microcredentialing leads to that. Here in Kentucky, because of some of the policy work we have our higher ed working with some of our schools and districts, educational cooperatives, and incorporating microcredentialing into part of our rank system in Kentucky. So you'll see within this schematic, microcredentials is just one component around the successful students movement. So when we switch on to the next slide. In Kentucky, we have it just came to my attention as well that I accidentally forwarded the unedited version of the slide. So if you want to have your pencils ready and mark where you see some mistakes, that's quite all right. We have three ranks, or as some states call them, tiers within the licensure system. The first rank, next slide, is our rank 3. That's the initial certification. So that's when you complete your 4-year program, you get your equivalent, so you'll get that rank 3 certificate. The next one is rank 2. So if once you have a regular certificate, once you earn a master's degree or a 5th-year program or an equivalent continuing education program, which is the continuing education option, which I'll discuss in more detail, how microcredentialing fits into that, we would see the rank 2. In Kentucky, we've also had changes within some of our regulations that once you complete a leadership program, that can be your principal, your supervisor of instruction, you can also receive a rank 2. So rank 3 is the first, rank 2 is that we with masters or another program, and then the highest rank in Kentucky is rank 1. So that's your regular certificate, your master's, or if you go and get an additional master's degree, another leadership certificate, or you complete a continued education option, or receive initial national awards, they receive rank 1. Each of these ranks or tiers has salary increases for the life of your certificate. So folks, even when in Kentucky, we may be able to say rank 3, they continue to get these ranks in more education as they move up through the field. Okay, next slide. We have multiple alternative routes. I think we're up to 8 if we include Teach for America. So we do have 8 alternative routes. Like many of you, the most popular is our option 6, that's university-based alternative route. So if they already have a bachelor's certificate in a non-teaching major, they can address pursuing an initial teacher certificate. You'll come out as a rank 2 with that program. So that is very popular, especially in some of our critical shortage areas. Folks are coming back into the profession or coming into the profession through this alternative route because they already have that. Within this option 6, and we have this conversation with our university folks as well, when they ask us, how do you see micro-credentialing fitting into any kind of program? I always bring up option 6, because in many of your option 6 programs, or university-based programs, there's a summer boot camp type event, I'll call it, where folks are going through, getting quickly caught up about the pedagogy, about the class, the school structure, etc., to get them ready for that first day. Many of the micro-credentials that an educator can achieve do not require students in a classroom to achieve. So there could be some basic skills that the teachers can learn through that summer boot camp situation in alternate programs. So when they're ready for the first day, they would have those competency skills, those competencies or discrete skills that they need. Then once they're in that program, especially through that first semester, there will be micro-credentials like collaborative coaching, formative assessment understanding, creating summative assessments, understanding children of poverty, etc. Then we can have these folks working through during that first year so that they can catch up to speed even more quickly than just traditional sit-and-get programs that many of them have. So again, working with universities, this is a conversation that we have with them often. So I see this as a good connection. Could we move to the next slide, please? We did have some regulation changes. We were a state that required, one of the very few states, that required a master's degree. That did change. One of the reasons it did change was because of cost. And secondly, there wasn't research that proved definitively that having a master's degree solely improves student performance. There are some anecdotal things about the things you can do that do show that. So we do have educators now, if they choose to, can remain at the bachelor's level. Next slide, please. And Jennifer had mentioned this. We were invited by our state, our Education Professional Standards Board twice to start talking with them about the work that we're doing on micro-credentials and how this can fit into policy. Leadership changed, leadership came on board, we were invited back to be on the task force to start talking about this work with them again, how micro-credentials could fill a gap in competency-based learning with our new teachers as they're moving up the career ladder. So beginning in August of 2019, we have our program called the Continuing Education Option. There's a Plan A that's been in our book since 1994. This is a program that can include university coursework, but can also be completely separate of university coursework. So when we look at the Plan B that came around, this allowed groups of districts like a cooperative like KVEC, universities, or individual school districts to become a provider of rate change programs. In the past, you had to be the Education and Professional Standards Board that did it, or a university. This opened the field around a continuing education option so that a teacher who is rate 3 could go through the continuing education option to achieve a rate 2 or a rate 1 with the accompanying salary increases with that. Now, the CEO, which is what is it called, is not a certification pathway. It's rate change only, it's pay increase only, and it's not transferable across state lines, so there's no reciprocity. So if a person has a master's in Kentucky and moves across state lines, that could transfer with them. A CEO, when we tell our folks up front, if you're planning on moving, do you think that master's is going to count? It will not. One thing that it does allow, though, if you have a rate 2 through the continued education option, you can get a rate 1 with national boards. Of course, the national boards transfers everywhere. So that has some So draw to it for that reason. So education options. Can we move to the next slide, please? Within those guiding documents, after we met with the State Department, I think we had multiple months of task force groups and some online meetings and face-to-face meetings, etc., of how micro-credentials could fit into the right program. The continuing education option was the way that they decided to go with this. So within the regulation, you will not find the words micro-credentials within the regulation. However, there are accompanying documents, guidance documents, that include competency-based professional learning, including micro-credentials, could be used for rank change once a teacher successfully completes continuing education option. So if you look at the bottom of that slide, there's language of guidance and schooling documents. Our instructional design, it had to integrate combinations of research, field experiences, professional development activities, which may include graduate courses and micro-credentials. KVEC does have an approved continuing education option program. We don't have any teachers in it right now, but it is a job and goal professional learning opportunity that includes multiple competency-based professional learning opportunities, plus micro-credentialing, and if folks want to incorporate college coursework, they could within that. We have other cooperatives that have continuing education options that are either standalone. We're working with organizations like Bloomberg, or we're working in collaboration with universities. We have a cooperative out in the western part of our state through the Green Global Education Cooperative that has a collaboration with Western Kentucky University, with micro-credentialing working within both programs. So in Kentucky, we do have micro-credentialing within our policies that leads to rate change, which leads to salary increases. Next slide, please. So that concludes my part of the presentation on policy. There's a lot more on policy. We can go deeper if you would like to have conversations about that at the end of the presentation. Again, there are our contacts, should you do information for our Twitter or for our emails. So any questions at this point, or I'll be happy to wait after the whole session.
Robert, this is Wesley. I just got a question for you. When you were reviewing your license tiers 1, 2, 3, it sounded to me like one of the basic components of that was a certificate, and I assume you mean a teacher's certificate. Could you explain a little bit what that looks like in Kentucky to get your different certificate levels, and is licensure or content exams or any type of examinations a part of that certificate process?
For initial licensure, we do have the practice exams, so that you would have to achieve those for your initial. To go into your master's degree, grade 2, that does not include any additional practice exams. It includes completing a master's degree, a continuing education option, an administration degree, etc., in order to move up that rank. So the first certificate you get is your teaching certificate. Then after you get your master's on your teaching certificate, it will have the bachelor's level, then your master's level, etc. Once you get if you get any administrative certificates, those or licenses, they're an annual certificate. Every 5 years, you have to have a certificate renewal. Currently in Kentucky, that means you have achieved 24 seat hours of professional development every year. And you have to submit, the school districts have to make sure you completed that and submit that so that you can get recertified. There is not a testing of it at the end of the 5th year. It's making sure you have the appropriate seat hours, or which university coursework could count towards that. In the past, we had to get a rate 2. You had to get your master's within 2 years. That limit's gone. You can get your master's within the time frame set up by the universities, which can take longer than 5, 6 years, whatever. But you do have your certificates renewed every 5 years based on professional development seat time. Now, micro-credentials fits into that because districts can look at the micro-credentials that are completed by an educator and say, okay, this is a pretty robust micro-credential. We'll give you 6 hours to that 24 hour, we would give you 12 hours to that 24 hour. So I know Jennifer been talking extensively about that, because we have schools where whole schools have completed MicroCredentials together in that collaboration and in that network. So I believe that when you look at the certificate, if you have MicroCredentials that help for a PD, you have PD that was competency based, not just sit and get. I'm trying to catch up with some of the questions in the chat.
So I got confused, this is Vivian Covington, I got confused when you said that alternate people start at rank 2.
When I was in the MAT program, you only have to have a bachelor's degree in an area prior to getting into the MAT. So once you complete that program, you come out, it's a Master's of Arts in Teaching. You come out as a rank 2. Yes.
Okay, thank you, that helps.
Okay. It says, for Governor Smith, is completed a state approved teacher master program required to receive a certification in Kentucky? Yes. If you are coming from out of state, it has to be an approved accredited program. So, and then it will accept it as well. Teacher, yeah. Any other questions up there?
So Robert, as far as them passing the licensure exams, is that something that has to be passed before any type of license can be recommended, or do you have any, bridges from one license to another?
Well, currently, and we're always looking at the practice exams. The practice exams have to be successfully completed prior to getting your initial license. So you complete your program, have your praxis. Then, of course, if you're not successful with your praxis, you can retake to be successful, but you have to complete your praxis, yes.
Are you finding that you're having lots of teachers who are having major difficulty in Kentucky passing those exams? And kind of how are you addressing that, if so? And if not, what do you contribute that to?
I would probably have to divert that question and get back with some of my colleagues to state that I've been away from them with the pass rates for several years now. At the time when I was there, we did have high pass rates at many of our areas. Some of the areas that had issues, sometimes are English language arts, and sometimes world languages, we have issues. I don't know how that is now, but I can certainly find out for you and get back with you on that.
All right, folks, any additional questions for Mr. Brown this time? All right, we will, first off, I want to thank Jennifer and Robert for being with us this afternoon. Thank you for devoting time to spend with us. We definitely appreciate your insight, and I know in my mind I've got a lot of thoughts right now and questions, but just thank you so much, and hope that we can be able to get some follow-up from you guys as well regarding questions that may arise over the next few months of working on our project. We have two more presenters, and I'd like to take a moment to introduce them. First, we have Ms. Sandra Hurst, and Sandra's passion for reaching students across Arkansas has always been evident in all that she does. Her pursuit of all students and teachers and efforts to help them grow has never wavered, as she has become a champion for education in Arkansas. From the beginning as an educator in rural Northeast Arkansas and then in Central Arkansas, for Sandra, it has always been students first. For over 20 years, she devoted her life to ensuring that students in rural Arkansas have access to the best education possible. Following a stint in the Cabot School District, Sandra became principal at White County Central Elementary for 5 years, transforming the district into a model for excellence in rural Arkansas. Taking over 25 years of experience to the Arkansas Department of Education, Sandra has risen to position of Director of External Operations for ADE, where she continues to champion students and teachers through programs designed to make world-class education accessible to all. So we welcome Ms. Sandra. Also, we have Bobette Ray, who is the Program Advisor for Educator Effectiveness, the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education for the Arkansas Department of Education. She works to promote the use of MicroCredentials as a form of professional learning for Arkansas's teachers and to create viable career opportunities for Arkansas's teachers through the Teacher Center Continuum. Ms. Ray joined the Division of Elementary and Secondary Education after 3 years of district administration in ELA and social studies curriculum in a central Arkansas district. Before joining the district in 2017, Ms. Ray spent 7 years with the National Math and Science Initiative in Dallas, Texas, working with local, state, and national partners to ensure unrepresented students have access to advanced STEM courses through college and career readiness programs. Ms. Ray holds a bachelor's degree in gifted, talented, and creative education and curriculum administration from Arkansas State University and Bachelor's of Arts degree in English from the University of Arkansas. So welcome, Ms. Ray and Ms. Hurst, and the floor is yours this afternoon.
All right. Good afternoon. We are so happy to be on here with you and so honored to be to even be asked to be a part of this today. I'm not going to say a lot. I'm going to, which all of you that are on here from North Carolina that know me already, that's probably going to, you're thinking that's not the normal. I know, but I really am not going to, because Bobette has more to share than I do. The only thing I really wanted to say is in Arkansas and in our division that we work with, we have a lot of initiatives going on. We have and a lot of things that have gotten started and then suddenly stopped because we didn't have the manpower to finish it all. And so here at the department now, we are working to really ensure that we have people like Bobette coming to the department and concentrating solely on one initiative. And this one was near and dear to my heart, and I'm going to ditto a lot of things that I heard Robert and Dr. Carroll say today, because we've gone through a lot of that. I don't think we're as far along as we want to be, or even as far along as Kentucky is, but we've always said that when you're on the cutting edge, expect to bleed, and we did. As a matter of fact, we started this process thinking that we could roll it out with our novice teachers, because that was one of the programs that I was over at the time. And I love MicroCredentials, and I love what they do and support. So we made them mandatory, which was a really big mistake at the beginning, because not only making them mandatory was an issue, but then imposing that on new teachers who had no background in teaching yet. And then Arkansas, we have a lot of teachers that are under an Act 1240, which means that they are not licensed, and they're in the process of being licensed. So now you're adding another layer of even educationese on people who are not coming from education backgrounds. So we've moved away from that. We started this whole new thing with MicroCredentials, using what we've learned, looking at data and people who were not completing them and why they were not completing them. And so we're now working on our professional development rules, and we do have in law that MicroCredentials may be used as professional development, but now we're in the process of cleaning those rules up. And so, I think sometimes when we get away from the classroom, or we get away from that practice, that real touch, we tend to lose touch. And so I think us stepping back and talking to our practitioners and finding out what they really needed has been beneficial as well. And so when we put this group together to figure all of this out, Bobette now is going to share with you what it is we figured out. So I'm going to leave this up to her now. And I'll answer questions if you have any.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm excited to be here and share with you what we're doing in Arkansas. I started with the department in September, toward the end of September, actually. So I'm still playing the new card. When I don't know something, I say, well, I'm new. And I'm going to do that until this next September. But if you'll advance the slide, this was I'll kind of share with you where Arkansas is. Our current uses for MicroCredentials center around our career continuum. We have also a tiered system of licensure. We have early career professional, and then it kind of, teachers have two options. They can earn a designation of master or lead professional. So micro-credentials are involved in both of those pathways to master and lead. They're not the only way to earn those designations, but all of the pathways involve some form of competency-based, job-embedded demonstration or submission of artifacts. National boards is one way to become a master, or that master designation. So then we have, someone's already gone down to bullet 3. So we have several different routes to licensure in Arkansas. We have alternative pathways, but every pathway ends at the praxis. So when you do that, do you really have different pathways to licensure? So one of the things that we have really started looking at is diversifying our teacher pipeline. And so one of the things that I'm excited about is that we will now supplement the content area praxis. So if a candidate is within 2 standard areas of measure, and if praxis does not provide a cut score, then our State Board of Education does. So if they're within those 2 SEMs, then they can earn approved micro-credentials, and upon successful completion, then they can transition from a provisional license to a standard license. And so I have interviewed a lot of the teachers who have used that, and I'll kind of admit that I have in the past been a test snob. I kind of think, you need that standard and you should be able to pass the test. But I have kind of done a 180. And after interviewing these teachers, I realized what we would be missing and what students would miss out on if we did not have these teachers in the profession and provide that alternative way around the praxis. So that's one that we're very excited about. We also have micro-credentials around pedagogy. As Sandra mentioned, we tried having our early career professionals do micro-credentials. Some were very successful. It was usually the year 3 teachers who were finishing up that 3rd year as an early career professional. And then it also depended, we advertised that micro-credentials are personalized learning, but a lot of times I think the teachers were kind of coerced into doing a particular micro-credential, and it wasn't really tied to where they felt their professional growth needed, what their professional growth needed to focus on. So our future uses of micro-credentials, we have lots of state initiatives. One of those is called the Reading Initiative for Student Excellence, and it's the shift to the science of reading. And we have, it is in legislation that teachers have to demonstrate proficiency, and there was a 6-day professional development sequence of your traditional sit and get PD. It was excellent PD though. It was very engaging, and there was a lot of information that the teachers took away. But now the question is, how do we make sure that those initiatives are actually implemented in the classroom? And so that's where we see micro-credentials coming in, and those would be things that we want to develop as an agency, and probably create a stack, as Jennifer mentioned. And then we also have a similar math initiative. And then eventually, we would like to create our own stacks for lead and master professionals that include and really support the state initiatives that we have. So right now, those are with outside providers. Okay, next slide. So this slide is about our work that we did with Robert and Jennifer. One of the things that my position was created to get micro-credentials off the ground in Arkansas, and so we as people would come to me and talk about micro-credentials or say, our group wants to create a micro-credential, I started sensing that we weren't all talking about the same thing. And so I really wanted as an agency, if we were going to create something that had or put our stamp of approval on something, that we had a common language, a common understanding, and a common standard of rigor. So Sandra had a relationship with Robert and Jennifer, and so she introduced us, and we felt like it would be a good partnership. And so we had a team. We had people from career and technical education, from learning services, educator effectiveness, and then the professional licensure standards board that participated. And so it was really a great opportunity to bring different units of our agency together that have typically been siloed, and to start conversations around professional learning for teachers. We each have unique challenges, and so we were able to kind of share those, and then we landed on a micro-credential topic or competency that we felt would be a cross-agency fit. So you can see on the side, it's the educator self-assessment and professional growth. So like Kentucky, we use the Danielson framework as our evaluation system. And so we have tied that to self-assessment and then developing a professional growth goal. And we feel like it will be something that both administrators and teachers can really learn and grow from. And so we will, I actually sent the micro-credential out today to the first principal who had agreed to go through that with some teachers. And so we will collect those samples, and then we'll bring the team back together to look and decide, is this really what we were expecting when we created the micro-credential? And so we'll assess and calibrate and make adjustments, and I'm sure I will be emailing Robert and Jennifer for help. But we'll just think that it would be a really good thing. We would like for it to be live for teachers to use when they come back in the fall of 21. Okay. One of the things, when we talk about lessons learned, I think that communication, you cannot over-communicate your vision and the steps that you want to take to get to your vision. So one of the things, we had pockets of teachers that participated in some pilots around micro-credentials and understood what they were doing. We have a couple of districts that have really bought in. But overall, across the state, I think that there's a lack of understanding. So our communications team with the division is working with me to develop micro-credential informational video. Also frequently asked questions. I'm getting the same. A lot of them have to do with professional credit, because we do still require teachers to have professional credit hours each year for their professional development. And so administrators are calling and saying, a teacher earned a micro-credential, I don't know how much professional credit to award them. So making that shift from thinking about professional learning in time to competency is going to take some guidance. So anyway, but I have there's still questions about the micro-credential supplementing the praxis score. So I've assembled a list of those questions that we will push out to districts. Micro-manuals, and this has been my favorite part, is really talking to the teachers who have earned micro-credentials and finding out how it benefited them professionally, what they think about their professional practice, the impact that they feel they have on students as a result of earning the micro-credential. And so that's been very good. So we're going to put those together and have little short micro-manuals. And then hopefully this will all be a rollout that will take place in June around our state. We have a big state learning summit in Hot Springs, and so we would like for that to have kind of a big social media blitz around micro-credentials. Okay. This was just kind of a timeline. You know, we're going to go slowly. We have options, like I said, for from from providers of micro-credentials. So that our development, you know, we're going to take slowly. We do have a grant that they have created. We've seen the first one and provided feedback on that. But over the grant included 22 micro-credentials over a 2-year time span. So we will, you know, be developing those, and then the other micro-credentials that we have talked about. Okay, next slide. And this is just our career continuum. So it's just a very simple design. We have added, since I came, aspiring professionals, because again, we want to build that pipeline, and we are working with Educator Rising, who also have micro-credentials. So aspiring teachers could be exposed to that concept of earning a micro-credential as early as high school. And we really want to keep them on that track so that they enter an educator preparation program. And then you said we want to, our master and lead teachers, we want to use as the foundation of support for all of our professionals. Really use them. One of the things, you know, research indicates that it's that cooperating teacher or mentor teacher that has the greatest impact on early career professionals, and being paired with an effective mentor or cooperating teacher is going to make all the difference in that teacher's career. So we really want to use our lead and master designation teachers for those critical roles. And so lessons learned, the need to collect data. Right now, most of the information we have or data that we have is anecdotal. So we really want to, as we start to see more teachers do this, really track the things that Jennifer referred to in her slides, kind of those same questions. And then I think pilot before policy. We kind of jumped out and put some things into policy around, you know, our designations that I think we could have been a little more cautious. And so I would just recommend, you know, that you really think about piloting things before you put it into policy. Communication to all stakeholder groups, I think, is crucial. And then the modeling best practices by aligning micro-credentials to professional teaching standards would be the takeaways in the 6 months that I've been here. So I will let Sandra jump in, or if you have any questions, I would be happy to, one of us will be happy to try to answer those.
Ms. Ray, this is Wesley. Just a couple of questions so far in the presentation. You mentioned that you guys use micro-credentials as a supplement to the praxis. And I'm just curious of what that looks like, maybe how many micro-credentials must be met to meet that supplementation. Also, just from listening, it sounds like most of your micro-credential work has been focused on non-beginning teachers to kind of develop into expert, advanced, and mastery teachers. And I just want to make sure I'm understanding that that is correct.
Yes, and it's like Sandra said, you know, we haven't hit that sweet spot with our early career professionals on how much is enough. If it's truly job embedded, and it's a micro-credential that supports the day-to-day that a new teacher has to do, then I do think it's manageable, but there just needs to be a lot of guidance, and I think being very thoughtful and intentional on the selection of the micro-credential, and then that coaching support that goes along with it. So we're not eliminating that from the table, but I do think that most of our focus will be on those mid-level teachers going from career professional to either master or lead. And let me just kind of add that those designations were created, again, as a retention policy to keep great teachers in the classroom. We feel that teachers were leaving and going into administration because they felt that was their only avenue for advancement within their career. So we're hoping that this will, will keep teachers in the classroom where they're impacting students the most.
Yeah, one of your comments I wrote down, you mentioned that one of your mistakes was making them mandatory. I think one of you guys mentioned that. And that just really stuck out as being powerful to me that, and like you mentioned, you're adding, you don't want anything that's going to make it more difficult for beginning teachers to really get their feet wet in the first few years of teaching. And also, do you guys have any alternative pathways to teaching in Arkansas? For example, in North Carolina, we have, what's called a permit to teach. We have an emergency license, residency license that are non-traditional. Do you guys have any of those options in Arkansas?
We have technical permits a lot, and that was one reason that our CTE friends wanted to take part in this development of a micro-credential. Lots of their teachers are on technical permits, so they come from trade and industry. They have no background in education or pedagogy, and so it's kind of a revolving door because they don't have the skill set. They decide that it's not for them, and they go back to being a welder or whatever they were in their prior life. And so they really feel like if they can develop something, some on-the-job, learn by doing kind of things that will support them, that they will stay. So we do have people on technical permits. We have emergency teaching permits, which they're not licensed. It is strictly an emergency teaching permit, and we want that to be the exception rather than the norm. But we have some really high-need districts. Geographically, they have challenges, and so we're really working on those teacher shortage areas, and we have administrators that are identifying teachers to work on their master or lead designation through micro-credentials to try to build capacity so that they can support teachers and retain them. Again, it's just they have so many challenges that it's really hard to keep teachers.
And we also have Apple, our alternate route, where, like Bobette's talking about the CTE teachers, these are teachers who are coming in with a bachelor's degree. And then they have, right now we just have one micro-credential that's embedded into that program that we run through the state. And it's just a pathway to licensure, so it's not a degree, but it is a pathway to licensure. And we use right now one that's around culturally responsive teaching because, like Bobette said, a lot of our data is, it's not the best data, but one of the things that we have found out is that when we have surveyed teachers and asked them why they're leaving the profession, tends to go back to that. So that was why we built that one pretty much first. And then we do have a set of micro-credentials that we built around around tests, because we use tests as our evaluation tool, which is the Danielson model. And those micro-credentials are there and being used in the mentoring program, but we don't force anyone to use them. So one other thing we found out, and Bobette, you maybe didn't mention this, but we talk about this a lot. We kept wondering why teachers, since we thought this was the best form of professional development, why wouldn't teachers think this? And we realized that, it is a lot of work and it's more than sit and get. But if there's not a carrot there, sometimes they don't really want to finish the process. So that's why we've had to add these things like Bobette's talking about, our career continuum, and working with school districts to actually acknowledge those designations and then actually look at their salary schedules and make changes so that those teachers can get some monetary, get something monetary back. And because we also know that talks. So you have to have some kind of carrot, and I think that's where we've struggled some too. What would we really be able to get back to teachers other than knowing that I've improved my professional skills, but am I going to really get anything for this? And so besides that, and sometimes that's hard to get across.
Sandra, what does that look like in regards to the carrot? Do you guys have you revised your whole salary structure based on licensure tier and micro-credentials, or is there just an additional bonus for teachers that show proficiency in micro-credentials in specific areas?
Well, I'm going to use an example of one of our school districts here. We being at the state and being over licensure, does make it look a little different from us, and our districts, have local control. And so just like our 36 hours professional development that we require, the district pretty much, they have, they have some set standards of what they need to do with professional development, but we can't really impose that. So what they do to get there. So we have a school district right now, though, in the northern part of the state who realized that they were losing teachers going to districts maybe 10 and 20 miles just from their district in that radius, and they were losing those teachers because of pay. And so they all have, they have a set standard on how much they're going to pay for a bachelor's or a master's, and maybe 15 plus hours, or they can play with that salary schedule however they need to, as long as it fits what's in law. But what this particular superintendent wanted to do is he said, I want to stop losing these teachers. What can I do? So we worked with our programs here around Title II. We've even got people looking at ESSER funds, and that's a whole nother topic. But we started looking at their funding sources and how they could reallocate their funds within their district to restructure their salary schedules. So we talk a lot to districts about that and give them those ideas, but they have to implement that themselves with their school boards. So this particular superintendent decided that he was going to take micro-credentials to a whole nother level. He looked at the needs of his school. He worked with Bloom Board in the development of some of those micro-credentials, and even some, we've worked with Digital Promise too, but took these micro-credentials and got teachers designated in the areas of need of their district, and then he pays them an additional amount. It's in their actual salary schedule and not just a stipend, which some districts do that, but he paid not only for them to get the micro-credential, but then paid them to use them as teacher leaders in his buildings. And he's finding out that he is retaining those teachers because now they're making more money than they could have going 20 miles, to another district. And the other thing about this is he's actually retaining them because they're not going to be recognized in another district. They're only recognized in his district. So that's been an interesting, scenario to watch.
So there's no state salary tied to micro-credentials that's statewide?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Not at this time. We'd like to see that, but it's just, we're not there yet.
Okay.
I think Bradley's question, is it possible to obtain a clear license, which we would call that a standard license in Arkansas, without completing a state-approved teacher prep program? Yes, it is. We do have Apple that Sandra mentioned. You have to have a degree, but if you have a degree, then you can complete this program and become fully licensed.
And I wonder if maybe that question is, does it go through our educator prep approval program? And like that one in particular does, but like what Bobette's saying, all of our alternative routes have to meet, certain requirements, and they all have to meet those ones through educator prep, which we run educator prep, yes.
Yeah, and one of the things that I would add to what Sandra's saying about this, as she said, each district sets their own salary schedule. But one of the things in interviewing teachers who have earned their master or lead designation, and I never say, do you have any monetary reward, but I'll say, so what kind of perks has the designation brought? And a lot of them really feel like, one teacher said, I've been able to advocate for my position, and I think it's because I earned this lead designation that my principal really valued my input, and so she went to him and said, teachers need, she wanted to be a co-teacher for technology. So she pushes into classrooms every day and takes the teacher's lesson plan and shows that teacher how to use different technology tools to make it more engaging for students. So she said, I don't think that would have happened without having that designation. Another young, I think he probably has about 6 years of experience, and he's earned his lead designation. And it was kind of the same thing. He said, my principal has included me in a lot of leadership committees now, and I think it's because of this designation and the experience I got from going through these micro-credentials. So there are things that we're encouraging districts to do to award quality points for interviews and consideration for employment to teachers that have their leader master designation. So, but ultimately, we would like, to see them get an increase in their yearly pay.
And Bobette, Virginia mentioned, she said this example is like a limited license in a way. And it is in a way when you talk about designations, because we offer to districts what we would use designations for. We tell them how we believe those roles should be played, but they get to make that choice. So in this superintendent's, in what he's done, it limits that teacher. If you get that designation through that district, it pretty much is just recognized there. Now, that could change in the future, but right now, that's the way it is. And Bradley asked, would it be possible to obtain a clear license through MicroCredentials alone? And that's with a previously earned bachelor's degree. So we do, a bachelor's degree is required regardless. And then, we have those other ways of like passing the praxis for your content area or going through some other programs. But as of right now, and Barbara, unless you know something that I'm not in on, we don't have a way that you just work straight through MicroCredentials to get that license. I really would love that because I know we talked about praxis earlier, and we deal with the same situation here. That's why we opened up the SEMs with that, alternative or alternate assessment plan. But that would be something really good in the future that we would love to see.
All right. I think we're at the end of your presentation. Is that correct? All right. Well, we really appreciate you guys, all four of you, speaking with us this afternoon. So before we move further, Ms. Ann's going to close us up here in just a second. But does anyone have any overall questions? I agree. Virginia, those were excellent presentations. They were. I'm sure everyone's mind is spinning like mine is, and I probably could hog the conversation and continue on with thousands of questions. So don't be surprised don't reach out to you in the next week or so with some questions. But does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask our presenters this afternoon? Okay, Ms. Ann, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, I'd also like to echo Wesley's thank yous for our colleagues from Arkansas and Kentucky. I would say you have a passion about your work, and it is evident in both states, and I think you're now connected to each other as well through this. So we appreciate it, and we really appreciate you helping us dig in with some specific examples that could influence what we do next. So thank you so much from me as well. So I would like to open up the floor for a discussion based on what we've heard today and how we think, what are the things that we've heard today that we think we need to think about as we move forward and look at the model for North Carolina. So I'll open with that question. What are our thoughts and considerations based on these two presentations that we've had today, or any other thoughts that you have around micro-credentialing that we think we need to consider? Please unmute or put your thoughts in the chat. Either way will work.
So, Anna, this is Vivian Covington, and one of the things that, I think we've been highlighting or wrestling with is this license 3 on our pathway. If we have someone coming out of an prep program that doesn't have licensure testing, being moved to a license 1, just like someone with just a bachelor's degree. And what I kind of heard today, I think I heard today, was that there's a minimum four-evaluation license in these 2 states and with their processes, and then this is for growth forward. So I'm like sort of marrying that around and around, and I'm thinking in terms of what we've been asked to do in this subcommittee.
Okay, thank you, Vivian. I took note of that.
This is Melissa Tooley at New America. We've done a lot of research on micro-credentials, including interviewing Sandra and Robert and Jennifer. And one of the things that I think we sort of continue to try to understand is whether micro-credentials are as appropriate for demonstrating knowledge as they are for demonstrating competencies or skills, like pedagogical skills. Clearly, it's hard to separate those two things, right? Like, to teach students fractions, for example, you need to understand the content and you need to understand the pedagogy. It's sort of hard. I think I've struggled with sort of like, is there this false dichotomy between demonstrating knowledge and demonstrating pedagogy, and like whether micro-credentials would be best suited to measure competency in one of those things better than both of those things. Like whether, I'd be curious to hear from folks in Kentucky and Arkansas whether measuring knowledge would be sort of an appropriate use of micro-credentials versus the application of that knowledge through some sort of pedagogical demonstration application.
Yeah, I think the individuals from the ladies from Arkansas talked about, they had on one of their slides of supplementing the content area praxis. I thought that was a pretty interesting idea, because we hear, and of course everything's stories, right? So I call it stories. Like, we hear stories of teachers not able to pass the praxis, they get really close. It could be a testing accommodation issue, or they're just not good at testing, but quote, they're a good teacher, unquote. So I think digging into that a little bit as a kind of like, if you've done it X times and then you have an opportunity to, that to me would be related to content in terms of that from Arkansas. So if you're okay, Melissa, I'm going to ask the ladies from Arkansas if they're still on here. I see Bobette is still on here. Yeah.
I have a perfect anecdotal story for you. I interviewed a young lady who had transitioned to a standard license by doing a micro-credential. And I asked her, about her background, and she got into education in a private school. Her degree was in social work, so she had moved out of state, and she got hired by a private school, and she decided she really liked teaching. She wanted to coach. She had an opportunity to move back to her hometown and become the head basketball coach. But she couldn't pass the praxis. So when she found out about the micro-credential, she was so excited because she previewed it, and she said, these are the things that I do every day with students. So she said, I can do this. The problem with the praxis, she was taking the health and PE praxis, and she had not gone to school for that. Her social work background really didn't prepare her for that, but her enthusiasm, she has a mentor program for young adults, just all of these things that, she was one of the ones that I really had that moment when I thought students would miss so much if she were not a teacher in their school. So, I want us to continue to track that. We also, for elementary, they have elementary K-6 people have to take all 4 sub-tests on the praxis, and so we do require them to earn 1 micro-credential for each area that they're within the 2 SEMs. So they may have to do multiple ones. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, and I like, Babette, what you were saying. It really is a performance-based assessment of what you're doing in your class. So, we really toyed around. If you don't have a classroom or students to work with, you can't actually do a micro-credential. There might be some out there, like Babette right now has some that she works with where on the equity micro-credentials, where it's kind of assessing where you are with bias and things like that. But when it really gets into the micro-credentials, the ones that we use, classroom teachers, it's really showing what you can do with your content. So many times, and you all know this, we have people that are really good at their content, but the question is, can they teach it? And that's what we really want to know. So that's another reason, we're sold on micro-credentials and why we're using them in this way.
And I think with the praxis, with that 2 SEMs, that they do have content knowledge. So it does come down to, and lots of the people that I interviewed, talked about test anxiety and all of those kinds of things that go along with standardized tests. And we also know that it's a barrier. We have a disparity in our state between teachers of color and students of color. And so we really feel that the praxis is one of those barriers, and we want to find a way to remedy that.
And Lee, I'm going to answer this for Arkansas. Kentucky, you might want to say something about who trains the assessors and how do you ensure consistency in scoring the micro-credentials. The ones that we have done in the past, we tried to do here when we were doing them through mentoring. We were trained. We actually were trained by Bloom Board because they were the writers of our micro-credentials at that time. And they did our training, they calibrated us, and then we realized that we did not have, again, the manpower here to do that. And so we have used outside vendors in these micro-credentials, and it goes through that approval process that Babette mentioned earlier. So right now, that's what we're doing, but Babette can tell you what we are doing in the future with that, because she's working with Robert and Dr. Carroll and their group. So Babette, what are we going to do in the future when we're writing our own?
I was reading the chat, Sandra. I missed the question.
I was saying that you might want to share with them what your plan is moving forward with us writing our own micro-credentials and how we are going to train the assessors and ensure that consistency in scoring those micro-credentials, that it's valid and reliable.
Well, one thing that I have learned in working with Jennifer and Robert, they have the people who assess actually earn the micro-credential themselves. And I think that that's a really important step. I've been trying to coach a group of teachers through a collaborative coaching micro-credential that KVEC developed. And I have emailed Jennifer, several times asking questions because I haven't earned it myself. So I think that, the first one that we have created, all of our team is going to work through that as an earner and see where we think teachers might struggle and where we weren't clear. And then we'll look at our responses and see if we're all on the same page, or if somebody's out in left field, and then maybe we need to go back and tweak the way we ask the question. We want to allow eventually teachers on the career continuum who are lead and master teachers and have that experience with submitting artifacts and evidence to be scored, that they would become our assessors, and we would bring them in and calibrate. So, we have a plan. It's just going to take time to implement.
This is Jennifer, and I'll just chime into that because trying to get to the heart of Lee's question. The issuers, the assessors of a micro-credential are usually the developers. So in KVEC's instance, the micro-credentials that we have developed, we are responsible for identifying the assessors. And we have different assessors. We have staff who have developed some of these micro-credentials, and they assess them. And then we have implemented the model with those teacher practitioners that I mentioned earlier who have developed micro-credentials, of giving them the opportunity to earn a small stipend to also be assessors of the micro-credentials that they have helped to develop. But we do have kind of, checks and balances there where the assessor does not issue the micro-credential. It has to go through another layer in order just to double check and make sure that everything is there before that micro-credential is issued. Then you have that whole other layer about the recognizers, and that is the people who give currency to that micro-credential. So that one falls back to, in our state, we are a local control state, so for professional learning credit, if that's what we're using the micro-credential for, then that comes back to the school to make the determination if that micro-credential is recognized for professional learning credit. So we talk about a micro-credential ecosystem that includes the developer of the micro-credential, the person who owns it, the assessors, the folks who issue the micro-credential, and then the folks who recognize it for some type of currency. So there are different kind of levels to that work. But we could talk more about systems that we use to train assessors. But you're right. The validity of the assessor and the validity of the micro-credential are important things to consider.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, Melissa, was there any other point that you wanted to come back and make? Or did that help answer what you were discussing?
Yeah, I think it helped answer what I was wrestling with, but I think more to just, ask the larger subcommittee whether if it is sort of like a false dichotomy in some ways to say, well, there's content here and there's pedagogy here, because, truly, like, what micro-credentials are trying to assess is your ability to apply both of those things. Like, I think that's what we heard, and I guess I personally am concerned that a student might get a teacher who could only do one of those things, but not both. And so if we sort of have students at the heart of this conversation, thinking about, are we willing to make, in those sort of earlier licensure stages, sort of a trade-off, like, well, you might get one, but not the other, and like, how do we, do we have to do that, and could we not have some other ways, perhaps, to try to capture the application of both of those things that aren't necessarily like a licensure assessment, if that is one of the barriers to folks coming into the profession.
Yeah, I agree. And Jill, I like what you put in the chat that, it seems to me that most micro-credentialing here has been, for the teacher that's in the classroom, right? Like the teacher of record. So the PD piece is to focus on things that it's going to be high impact practices that are going to actually improve student achievement and student learning are definitely on target. So I appreciated your comments in the chat as well. Well, thank you again to we're out of time. We've had a lot of information today. This has been a big piece for us in terms of learning today. So thank you again to our colleagues from Kentucky and Arkansas. Jill did ask, can the EPPs be partners in the development of micro-credentials? As an EPP, I'm going to answer yes. I think EPPs would tell you that many of them are competency-based already, and that they could do that could be a piece that could happen. And I think it could be for parts of this, it could be really, really helpful. So I'm going to close this out now, so we keep, so I'm respectful for everyone's time, but thank you everyone that has joined us today for our subcommittee meeting, especially to our guest. We do have another meeting next month, so we look forward to seeing you then. Kim, would you like to just remind us of when that meeting is? I'm sorry, I don't have it up.
I believe it's June 16th from 2 to 4. I believe that is when the time is.
June, that is correct. Good job, Kim. That is June 16th from 2 to 4. We will go back to our to the licensure model that we're looking at, and we'll start with maybe a review of this and questions and anything anyone has thought of. I imagine we will be in touch with Arkansas and Kentucky in the meantime to answer any clarifying questions. Feel free to send Wesley, Kim, or myself any clarifying questions, or feel free to reach out to our colleagues that are with us today. Everyone have a great day, and go ahead.
Can we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, yes. Can someone please provide a motion for us to adjourn? Thank you, Kim.
So moved. This is Jill.
Thank you, Jill. Second?
Second, Catherine Joyce.
Thank you, Catherine. Any comments? So, all those in favor of adjourning, please say aye.
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 Okay, all right, any opposed? I would think not. All right, everyone have a great day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.